Good morning, everyone. We're not going to start the meeting just yet. There is a fire alarm expected at 10, so I'm going to let the fire alarm go off, presumably in a minute or so, and then we'll start the meeting after that. Good morning, everybody. I'm Councillor Anne-Marie Barker, and I'd like to welcome everyone to the West Surrey Joint Committee on the 14th of April 2026. We're in the Council Chamber at Surrey Heath Borough Council for this meeting. Before moving on to the agenda, I'd just like to do a few pieces of housekeeping. We are webcasting the meeting live on the Surrey Heath Borough Council website, so all those attending the meeting do accept that they will be filmed and recorded. We have just heard in the room before the meeting started the test fire alarm. There is no further fire drill expected today. So if the fire alarm does sound again, then we should leave the building immediately by the nearest exit. The evacuation point is the Knoll Road surface car park, and the assembly point is indicated by a green sign at that location. Before the meeting starts fully, can I ask you to make sure that your mobile phones are turned off or on silent? The use of mobile devices, including for the purpose of recording or filming a meeting, is subject to no interruptions, distractions or interference being caused to any council proceedings or damage to any equipment or disturbance. If there is any disturbance, I may need to ask people to turn off their devices. I'm sure you're all familiar with the idea of microphones in front of you. Please turn it on when you're speaking and remember to turn it off when you have finished. If I do need to adjourn this meeting at any time, I will advise the meeting is being adjourned and state the time that it will be reconvened. There is no exempt business scheduled for today's meeting, but if we do need to discuss any exempt information, members of the press and public will be excluded from the meeting on the grounds that they involve the likely disclosure of exempt information under the relevant paragraphs of Part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Act. I'm going to begin now by asking members to briefly introduce themselves. If I start on my left over here, please. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Councillor Paul Follows, Leader of Waverley Borough Council. Sean MacDonald, Leader of Surrey Heath Borough Council, and welcome everybody.
Good morning, everyone. Councillor Julia McShane, Leader of Guildford Borough Council.
Good morning. My name is Joanne Sexton, Leader of Spelthorne Borough Council.
Good morning, my name's Catherine Powell. I'm the Surrey County Councillor for Farnham North.
Good morning, my name's Liz Townsend and I'm the Surrey County Councillor for Cranley and Ewhurst.
Lance Spencer, Councillor for Goldsworth East and Hallsall Village.
Matt Furness, County Councillor for Shalford Division.
Morning, Mark Newsey, Surrey County Councillor for Chertsey.
Surrey County Council for Staines. Thank you, everybody. And now the officers in attendance at today's meeting will also introduce themselves.
Good morning, I'm Terence Herbert. I'm the Implementation Team Lead.
Good morning, Nicola Kilwington. I'm the Programme Director.
Good morning, I'm Karen Brimacombe, Chief Exec at Moore Valley, but here today in my capacity as theme sponsor for People and Governance.
Good morning. Welcome to Surrey Heath. I'm Nick Stevens. I'm the Chief Executive of Surrey Heath and also the Deputy SRO for the West.
Thank you. And over on the back row, thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. Susan Sale, Monitoring Officer from Guildford and Waverley and Co-Workstream Lead for the Constitution and Shadow Authority Workstream.
Good morning. I'm Arabella Davies. I'm the Monitoring Officer for Moore Valley District Council and Co-Workstream with Susan Sale. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Good morning. I'm Andy Brown, Deputy Chief Exec of Surrey County Council and the Finance and Property Theme Lead.
Simon Rumsby, I'm the Secretariat for the committee.
Thank you. And of course, my Vice Chair as well.
Thank you, Chair. Robert King, co-leader of Reading Borough Council.
Couldn't see you two all sitting to my side, so I kind of forgot you were there. Sorry, Rob. Apologies. I think that's everyone's introduced themselves now. Thank you very much. I think we may have at some point Sir Tony Redmond, the lead commissioner from Woking, who will be joining us virtually today. He's not able to be here in person. Before we get on to the items that are on today's agenda, members will be aware that the civic and ceremonial report was originally identified on the forward plan for this meeting. It's not being brought forward today. There will be a briefing note circulated to members that sets out the context for this and explains the work that is being undertaken to help inform the forthcoming mop-up legislation, and that's something the government will be doing in the autumn, which will deal with these matters. And I think we've all been, as leaders, certainly working on those in our individual councils. At the previous committee meeting, I advised that the May joint committee meetings would need to be rescheduled to ensure our business is concluded ahead of the publication of the Shadows Authorities papers and to avoid a clash with member induction events. So the proposal being put to us today is that the East and West Joint Committees both meet on Monday the 11th of May, with the West Joint Committee taking place from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. at Guildford Borough Council. Can I ask if the committee is happy with that proposal? Is that agreed? Julia.
Thank you. I think the West, the joint committee meeting for the West was previously in the diary for the afternoon. So can we keep it with the afternoon, please? Because we've all got other appointments in the morning, given that it was given to us to be in the afternoon. Thank you.
Yes, obviously it was originally on the 13th. The day has changed as well. So it's Monday the 11th rather than Wednesday the 13th. We had to move to the earlier date.
Apologies, I thought it was still on the Wednesday. Sorry.
There has been some confusion, lots of dates going around. I know I've got myself confused as well. So following that, is that agreed by the committee? It's in the morning, yes. Is that okay? Thank you very much, and apologies for this changing around. I think it has been quite difficult to fit in dates and to make things happen because there were certain dates set down in legislation when we have to have meetings and when the new council has to meet as well. I've got no apologies for today's meeting. Are there any declarations of disclosable pecuniary interest, significant personal interest, any gifts or hospitality accepted to be declared today? No, thank you very much. We'll move on then to the first substantial item on the agenda, which is the minutes of the last meeting, which was held on the 13th of March. Are the minutes of the previous meeting agreed as a correct record? Councillor Paul.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just a quick question for ease of reading these in future. Would it be possible to request that the actions table be separated out from the minutes so that members can firstly confirm that all the actions that we've requested are in it, and also so that we can easily look at progress to those actions?
I'm getting a nod from Simon, the secretariat for the meeting, so I think that's agreed. That'll be helpful. Sean and then Liz.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just when those actions result in materials getting updated, could the updated materials also be shared so that members have visibility that those changes have happened? Thank you.
Thank you. I think it was in the last meeting we asked about the methodology for the disaggregation of services, and I'm not sure it got captured into the minutes. I don't know. I'm a bit concerned that some of the actions that perhaps we're putting forward or comments we're making that have implied actions maybe not be being picked up within the minutes, such as the methodology.
Thank you, Liz. Terence or Nicola, would you like to comment on that, please? Thank you.
So it's the plan for the disaggregation formula, decisions, etc., to be placed before the shadow authorities as soon as they are constituted, at which point we'll be able to go through exactly where we're at with the disaggregation principles and the evidence base behind them. Whenever it comes to whether the actions are captured properly and whether we're progressing them, we'll take that away and have a look at it.
Liz?
Thank you. I think we have asked about the methodology, and whilst I'm not saying that we're going to be changing it, it would be good to understand, especially to do with the main, adult social care and children's services in particular.
Okay, so we've had numerous meetings around the process around disaggregation. No decisions have been taken, and the role of the joint committees is to support the preparation of and agree the implementation plan. No decisions around disaggregation have been taken. It will be a matter for the shadow authorities as to how they're going to proceed with that. We could bring some details, some information. We could provide a briefing on what work has gone before, but again, that's a resource that will be required in order to do that.
Clearly, we recognise the pressures on the implementation team, so wouldn't want to use huge amounts of research, but it might be helpful just to have a short briefing note on what's been done to date. I mean, literally no more than a page on just the progress to date, I think would be helpful to members.
Happy to provide that, Chair. Is this specifically around children's and adults, or is this around all disaggregation from county services?
That would be around all disaggregation. Yes, please. Thank you, Nicola.
So, and also, it's whether you want it to extend into aggregation as well, because the principles cover both disaggregation and aggregation. So whilst understandably there's a focus on disaggregation, we're simultaneously looking at aggregation and ultimately bringing together. So we can probably update you in the round in that note on all of it.
I think that would be helpful. Yes, thank you very much, Nicola. Much appreciated. Paul?
Could I please ask that note also opine on any recent restructuring the county has done in those services so that the non-county councillors in this space know what has recently changed?
Significant changes.
So in terms of restructuring linked to LGR, there hasn't been anything because decisions haven't been taken linked to that. If this is about sovereign authority delivery, then that would be a separate, I think that would need to be a separate request that's then considered on. Okay.
Liz?
I'm sorry, just another point, and this is just a point of principle. To be honest, within the minutes, it says that we'd agreed the principles for the transition. I'd just like to say I'm a bit concerned that with the asset distribution and the split of assets, that it seems to imply that we agreed that that would be done on a geographical basis. And when we looked at it and we did discuss it, we didn't actually agree that. We accepted that there needed to be an asset split and that was a starting point, but I wouldn't want it to be that we had generally agreed to that, because we did say we want to obviously see the assets and understand, you know, the principles surrounding that. So I just wanted to clarify that point. And thank you for your offer of the aggregation and the disaggregation. That would be really helpful. Thank you.
Yes, please, Nicola. Thank you.
So I think, as you pointed out, we need a starting point to do the work, and the principles are the starting point for that. The principles will then produce an output that will be reviewed by the shadow authorities. At that point, there will be a decision as to whether that is the service configurations that want to be taken forward. And then in the context of that, there may be opportunities to look at alternative options. So it really is that starting point to present something and completely understand that there will then need to be a decision point around what's presented.
And thank you for clarifying that. And it is just from the point of view of the language being used, you know, that if somebody, like a resident's looking at the minutes at the moment, there is a certain assumption within it. And I just, you know, to use that as a starting point is very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. And if we can capture that in the minutes, I think it just helps with that clarity, doesn't it, really, that we're all clear on what is being discussed. I think we are all on the same page, but we just need to capture that. Thank you. Okay, are we happy to receive the minutes following those discussions? That's agreed. Thank you very much. We'll move on to item 4. This is the implementation plan update. You'll find this on pages 21 to 81 of the agenda pack. So I'm going to be handing over to Terence and then to Nicola to speak on this. Thank you, Terence.
Thank you, Chair. Just before I turn to the plan, some updates regarding activity of the implementation team and engagement with the government. The Community Secretary announced that each new unitary in Surrey will be receiving £900,000 as part of the transition funding offered by MHCLG. Guidance has been issued on how the funding can be spent. I've discussed the approach to managing the funds with the implementation team, including Nick as the Deputy for the West, and we are all in agreement that the allocation should be ring-fenced within the wider implementation fund, with commitments and spend reported through into the Joint Committee and then the Shadow Council. MHCLG have also confirmed their intention to change the backdating requirement for the Section 24 direction, which was supported by all councils in their representations last year. So this now means that there will be a slight delay with the direction coming in, expected sometime between the 1st and the 3rd of July. We anticipate bringing a paper to the first Shadow Executive meeting on this, although you will note that Section 24 is referenced in the Constitution item later, albeit that is the earlier draft. Turning very briefly to devolution, an expression of interest was developed and submitted to Government on behalf of 11 of the 12 current Surrey councils on the 20th of March. If Government responds favourably to the EOI, a devolution proposal can then be developed and a locally led consultation run following the Shadow Authority elections in May. It's likely this would take place during summer of 26. The Strategic Authority theme is ready to support work on developing a proposal for a foundation strategic authority should Surrey be confirmed in the next wave of FSAs. There will be a meeting next week with MHCLG around the assurance framework that they are putting in place, and will give an opportunity for other government departments to engage with officers from the implementation team around any policy developments or impact on the shadow authorities. Turning to the report, over recent months we've continued to build on the foundations for the implementation already agreed by this committee. That includes the vision, a high-level timeline and approach to transitioning all council services. The report today brings together the next and final set of draft chapters for the implementation plan, and specifically the implementation phase content covering finance, stakeholder engagement, equality analysis and IG. These sections are essential to completing the full plan required under the Structural Changes Order, and they set out some of the practical activities that ensure council services staff and assets can transition safely and legally to the new authorities. The committee is asked to endorse this new draft content and to note the accompanying updates on assurance, risk management, budget monitoring and communications which support delivery of the overall plan. Finally, I would like to emphasise that this work represents a joint endeavour across all 12 councils. Significant activity is underway across every programme theme to ensure the implementation plan is ready to hand over to the new Shadow Authority later this year, and that's keeping us on track for what I hope will be a smooth transition. With that, I'm going to hand over to Nicola.
Thank you. So just to add a few bits by way of further introduction to the report, and I wanted to pick up a couple of sections. So in terms of progress that's being made, the assurance and risk section as well. So all programme themes have now completed the initial mobilisation. This includes the mapping of the current services, defining the scope for their themes, identifying critical milestones for the transition, and preparing for the regular reporting that will go into programme governance. We have included an extract in the papers this time of the latest programme highlight report, and that was correct as of the 23rd of March. That was in Annex 2. If you would like me to later, I can speak to some of the areas that were showing off track to give you a further update, because obviously that's a couple of weeks ago now and progress has been made, so I can speak to that if there's any questions on that. In terms of kind of what is also happening, so obviously moving through the mobilisation phase, we are looking at applying the disaggregation and aggregation principles to develop options for services, which, as I said earlier, will be brought to the shadow authorities for decision later. We're looking very closely at the dependencies and interdependencies across themes. We are looking at the resourcing implications for all of this work, and also our kind of minds are looking towards what we call the vesting day blueprints, so that setting out of where the services will be at the point of transfer to the new authorities. So we are beginning the work to assemble those. In terms of assurance and risks, so we continue to embed the programme's single assurance framework across the whole programme that is looking to create consistency in how risks and issues are identified, scored and escalated. And this aligns with the emerging approach that's being taken nationally that Terence outlined that we're working with MHCLG on. The three categories of risk remain in place, so programme delivery risks, new authority readiness risks, and risks affecting existing councils' ability to maintain services during the transition. We have, at the request of the committee last time, now added risk scores, so they are included in the papers. Overall, the scores remain relatively stable compared to last time. The position with the data gaps that we identified previously from some district and borough councils referred in the papers as requests for information, that position is improving, with around half of the outstanding RFIs now submitted. And you'll note as well that capacity remains a significant area of focus, as does ensuring all safe and legal requirements are met ahead of vesting day. Just briefly on the budget position, so the report shows that 11.2 million of the 35.3 is currently committed, and that includes 2.9 million that relates to election preparations. The additional funding mentioned earlier, 1.8 million across the two councils, is obviously welcomed. A forecasting exercise has recently been undertaken by all themes and has resulted in a series of challenge sessions to support more accurate forecasting that will enable the programme to be delivered within the current budget, because we know there are some constraints that are emerging. And with the pressures that are being identified, they're being actively managed through tighter scoping of the work. We're looking at how we could phase some of the activity differently, and also looking to release further amounts of that 35 million through the governance process that we have. The forecast risk of exceeding available funding, if that should be the case, would of course be escalated, but we're not there at the moment. Briefly then, just at the end in terms of communications and engagement, so collectively all councils continue to work really strongly together on the comms relating to the programme. That includes support around the elections and ensuring that residents, staff and other stakeholders understand the transition timeline. And that workstream is also looking to plan key comms milestones, including the support that will be available to the new councils for their new branding and associated communications channels for the shadow authorities to agree as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Terence and Nicola. Before we go on to the discussion on the implementation plan and what's happening on the move towards the new unitary, Can I just pick up on this Foundation Strategic Authority? Because we talked last time at the meeting about putting in the expression of interest, and that's been done. But since then, it's become apparent that the government later requires quite a lot from councils in terms of almost bidding to have this Foundation Strategic Authority status, which seems quite a lot of work to be done for the teams, in addition to all of the work on the existing implementation plan. Is that something there is capacity for to do in the run-up to 2027?
I think we've already built in sufficient capacity within the implementation team. It's led, as you know, by Richard Carr, the Chief Executive Managing Director at Woking, and he is confident, as are we, that there is resource. But as with all of this, it is a significant amount of work in all of this that's required.
Thank you. Nicola?
Just to add that our understanding is that government may make capacity funding available for areas that are progressed for an FSA. So there is past precedent of £250,000 being given to areas to progress that. So obviously that figure's not been confirmed for Surrey, but the understanding is the government would make some funding available to support.
Thank you for that. Okay, I'll open up to the committee. Sean.
Thank you, Chair. Just in the interest of linking themes together there. So on the Foundational Strategic Authority, obviously I'm the one that's in the naughty corner for not signing up to this, and Surrey Heath not signing up to this, on the grounds of the cost, the complexity, and the fact that it increases risk for a fairly short duration of lifetime, because the pathway forward isn't clear yet from the government. Are we clear whether or not the 12 sovereign councils all have to vote for it or not? Thank you.
MHCLG officials have led us to believe that all 12 sovereign councils and the 2 shadow authorities would all need to support the proposal at the point it's submitted into the Secretary of State, which we'd anticipate would be in September. That would be for the FSA to be considered for a 1st of April 2027 start date. If that isn't the situation in September and the shadow authorities wish to pursue an FSA on a later timetable, it may be possible to submit or resubmit at a later point after vesting day. There would then be some implications to work through about where services, current services that have a connection to the devolution agenda may transition to, and they may need to be temporarily hosted somewhere, potentially then to move into an FSA at a later point, and there may need to be other governance put in place around some of the other devolved functions.
Sean.
Could I just come back briefly? So in the interest of partnership and collaboration, can I suggest that somebody tries to work with myself and maybe my Deputy Leader Alan here and some of our key other stakeholders and the Chief Executive of Surrey Heath to discuss this further so that we don't become a blockage to the process. Thank you.
More than sorry. More than happy to facilitate discussions, certainly with officers. As you know, this is a political discussion and decision, and officers will take instruction from the politicians as to how to proceed. So I'm not clear whether you wish us to facilitate a meeting between the leaders or whether this is purely around the process and the impact.
The latter, thank you, Terence. Yeah, the latter.
Catherine.
It's just a related point, since we're trying to link things together. Obviously, where the fire service sits is part of that equation very firmly. The papers are a bit inconsistent in terms of how it references the fire service. What's your current base plan?
So our understanding is that fire will remain on a county-wide footprint and that a combined fire authority will need to be created. The only uncertainty there is the exact timetable, but the intention is to work towards the 1st of April for that fire authority to be created. It's just the finer detail of the steps in between that we're still awaiting some clarification from government on. That would happen potentially alongside the creation of a foundation strategic authority because the Foundation Strategic Authority cannot host fire services because they would be a potential mayoral devolved responsibility. So the fire work stream, we have the Chief Fire Officer is the theme sponsor for that, is separately working towards that combined fire authority.
Sean.
Thank you for your patience. And just another administrative thing, I think if we're going for this, if the submission is due in September, then it's going to need a bit of orchestrating in terms of thinking through what the right places are for those decisions to happen at each council. And certainly we're trying to cancel meetings rather than have additional meetings, conscious of the workload on officers. So it will need a little bit of thought in terms of the orchestration of that. Thank you.
Catherine.
If we've finished on that subject, are you happy to make? Okay. Just in terms of the financial imbalance relating to infrastructure is obviously something as a committee we've mentioned several times. In reading through these papers, it still doesn't feel like that is captured in what the implementation team are working on. And I would just like some reassurance that is being addressed, because there are some very specific infrastructure requirements in the West that don't exist in the East that we do need to be able to address. And also how that would be addressed in terms of the equality impact assessments that are being undertaken, because again, that's not clear to me. Obviously, the West is inheriting a much worse financial situation than the East as things stand at the moment. Obviously, that can be addressed by not using the geographic distribution of assets. That would be one way of dealing with that. But I would just like to understand what the plans are, because it's not clear to me from reading the papers, Nicola, sorry.
Did you want to respond to that point, Nicola? Oh, I'm so sorry, Andy, thank you.
Sorry, Chair. Yeah. I mean, the reason it's not in there in detail is because we haven't gone through that in detail yet. Going back to Councillor Townsend's point around the principles, that gives us a starting place. I think we've got to start somewhere in terms of that that disaggregation of the county's assets, and I can visualise it in terms of a operational administrative split. I have said that when we look at commercial investments, they are there held primarily as an income line into the revenue budget, and therefore they should be looked at on a different disaggregation and a different view. The infrastructure deficit or imbalance, again, needs to be looked at, because we are disaggregating what's on the balance sheet as at 31st of March 27, and that imbalance is about what is coming down the future. So part of the first year budget will look at the investment that is needed in infrastructure across the piece. And I think you then combine those two elements to begin to say what is the imbalance going forward, and then you'll be into, or the shadow authorities will be into negotiations about how that imbalance can be addressed at some point. To give you some assurance, that is a equation that we are looking at to see how can that be best then put forward to the shadow authorities in not least the year one budget, but also then in parallel with the disaggregation aspects as well.
Thank you, Andy. Do you have a point to come back on that one?
If you don't mind, Chair, thank you. Just in terms of the equality impact assessment, obviously at the moment the West is going to be inheriting a worse financial situation. That didn't seem to be recognised in the section on the equality impacts because it tends to be those who are in the most vulnerable groups that are most impacted by financial constraints within the council. I just would like to understand how that's going to be reviewed.
So we will look to bring equality impact assessments in parallel to any decisions that are brought into the shadow authorities. They will, as you know, look at our public sector, or the new authorities and the current council's public sector equality duties, and as much as we can collect the data and the potential impacts that could be. So it will build on the initial work that was done around the business case, but will come in as the decisions are taken.
One further point, okay.
So just on that point, obviously, you know, we're talking about the shadow authorities negotiating with each other. Obviously, at the moment, the West has far more to lose than the East does in terms of the position that we are inheriting. So in terms of that negotiation, I think it is really important that the impacts of any proposals that are being put forward and the inequality between East and West that they will generate is captured in those equality impact assessments, and it's not just a generic statement about what's going to happen. It will separate East and West, and I guess that's the clarity I'm really looking for, because they will have to be joint decisions, and where we can't agree a decision, I'm assuming MHCLG will have to come in and enforce a decision being made. Is that where we're landing?
So the work on the EIAs will support the councils to have regard to equality as they take their decisions. The extent to which it will offer that, I guess, the full picture against decent, it needs to apply to protected characteristics and to the areas that are being looked at. So I think the information that we have will be prepared to support that decision making, whether it's the extent to which you're requesting it will be. I'm not sure at this stage if it will necessarily be, but it will be supporting the execution of those duties. And yes, our understanding is that MHCLG could potentially play an arbitration role. We are yet to hear what that in finer detail would look like, but they have indicated that that could be done, yes.
Thanks for that. So I have Rob next, and then Liz, Paul and Julia.
Thank you very much. Looking a couple of questions. First on page 39 on the annex. It's just on the housing revenue accounts. It's obviously some really complex governance requirements on the allocations policy. I was on the understanding that the capital programme would also have to be kept separate in terms of the boroughs and district, because we've obviously got a number of colleagues that don't have a HRA stock. I was sort of quite confused from when we had the call, I think it was with our Tandridge College, in terms of the legislation which governs that, because obviously I have residents that have built up a social housing stock through their rent setting. I've equally got a neighbour who doesn't have a HRA that presently doesn't have an allocation there. It's obviously something that boroughs and districts have an expertise. So, I mean, my broader question, Andy, is are we going to get some external advice on the legislative requirement here? Because it's not just an accountancy problem, it's an allocation and legislation problem.
Yep, and we are, the latest I've seen from MHCLG is about effectively ceasing the district and boroughs HRAs and then creating one for the west and one for the east, which would effectively open it up to the new geographical boundary.
It would require, to change the allocation policy though, my understanding would require a change in the Parliamentary Act, because we, you know, if you're a colleague in Spelthorne who has no HRA at the moment, so that was really my...
Sorry, I'm just talking purely from the financial fundamentals. Allocations policies will still then, as I understand it, but this is where we're getting the advice from, as well as the 30-year plans that were all in place as well, about what's ones then follow through in terms of the policies that then have to be effectively amended by the new shadow unitary, because they would flow through from the districts and boroughs. But from the accounting perspective and the financial perspective, effectively they're dissolved, and then the HRA is then created for West and East from an accounting perspective. But there are then fundamental components that still make up part of the policies around those operations that will need to be revised for the new shadow unitary.
I think I'll drop a few more, because each of us, when we ask a question on this, I think sometimes gets a different response, whether we ask a county or a borough colleague, particularly when I'm setting a 30-year plan, for example, for the maintenance of windows in council houses. My understanding is that remained with the borough and district, because it's still funded from the rent setting of that allocations policy which existed pre-LGR, not the revenue aspect, which is just the maintenance of it. It's very confusing and really complex for us to understand when we get different advice, and I'm sure it's the same for yourself, just from the monetary things. So, I mean, my next question really was on the number 7, which was on the revenue and benefits, which is around the council tax and NDR. Obviously, we also have different CTS policies, different release policies that require a lead-in and consultation period. I really wondered if if I'd missed it, or a briefing document in terms of is the new West and East Surrey going to operate for a period of time a separate relief policy on the old geographical boundaries, or does the legislation permit us to abolish that without a consultation for our residents?
So that's one of the things that's on our radar for, from Revenues and Benefits workstream, is around the fact that with the districts and boroughs, we all have different policies around that. Now we can look to put that as, or correct that as part of the year one budget, but that will be a decision that will be for the shadow authorities around that. There are some things that require a 12-month consultation, and therefore won't be able to be applied. We'll have a list of all of those things that you can do and you can't do, and then the pros and cons for that as part of the year one budget setting.
I wonder, Chair, if we would be able to pick that up as a communication piece for the new unitary, in terms, because it'll get very confusing for residents, particularly if they live on the border. Yeah. You know, we share a geographical border with yourself, Chair. You know, we'll have one side of the street which will potentially be 100% council tax relief and one that will be 80%, and it will be quite contentious, I'm sure, but it's going to be quite a complex advisory role, that.
Thanks, Rob. That's been noted, I think, by Nicola. Thank you very much. I'm going to go to Liz now.
Thank you. Can I just come back to the Equalities Impact Assessment mentioned just a moment ago? In that, when the original EQIA was, or EIA was sent in with the business plan, it did mention in it that the further EIAs were going to be produced to assist with the transition progress, and I don't think that has happened. I haven't seen that. I have been speaking to Andy about it, but you know, I am, as part of the original one, it did recognise in very small part that there might be a larger increase in some bills across parts of Surrey. Well, I think we know that there will be potentially, you know, that comment needs to be strengthened more, and the impact on, especially on lower incomes of residents, needs to be, you know, fully really looked into, not only about relief, but, you know, about the actual costs, because I still feel that we haven't actually emphasised the disparity between East and West, and how, you know, by virtue of an arbitrary line being drawn on a map, you know, the people in West Surrey are far more disadvantaged. And you know, I've been knocking on a lot of doorsteps recently, and people are really angry about it, really angry. And I don't think that we are giving it enough justice. I don't think we're emphasising how critical the situation is. And I think personally that we need to give it, that equality impact assessment needs to be redone, and we need to make sure that we're investigating those inequalities further. And I nearly fell out my chair a minute ago, Andy, when you said about one big HRA. I mean, you know, we've been asking for HRA stuff, and for, you know, since this committee started, and you know, we need to know a little bit more information. I know we're not making decisions. I'm very aware of that, but we do need to know more information, and that would be, you know, there needs to be a lot more thought put into that. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy.
Yeah, so on the HRA, I've got the aggregations in my inbox, and they'll be sent round hopefully this week. But we've got a HRA work stream. Obviously, the legal and safe route is around you know, the rent setting and the focus on the tenants as well. But there are, as you can be appreciated, there are a lot of technical aspects around HRA. So we will be getting some advice in on some of those certain parts. Happy to share that from that perspective. I think we're fairly clear in terms of the financial route, but there's obviously a lot more to it from that perspective. But be assured that we are aware of the aspects around HRA. We are fully aware of the situations in East and West and the aggregation of those. And when we circulate those, then you'll see that it will still be for whatever governance is set up around the HRA in the new shadow unitaries, for them to develop those plans going forward as well. And there'll be difficulties with those and challenges with those as well as it will be for the general fund on the revenue budget. But I wouldn't want, just because it is a very important area, the housing revenue account. We shouldn't detract from it. That, as well as the capital programme, gets lost sometimes within the revenue. But all three component parts are critical. But please be rest assured that we are therefore working on that through the work stream.
Thanks for that, Andy. I've got Paul, Julia, and then Sean, and then Joe.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I agree with the Vice Chair's point on the interpretation of those elements of the HRA. That's how I've always had it explained to me in the past before. But it does highlight, I think, the absence, once again, of there being a formal legal officer present for this group. I don't think we have a monitoring officer or a legal person who can comment. I know there's some very qualified people here, but none of you, I believe, are lawyers, solicitors, monitoring officers, etc. So again, we've got no legal support to answer some of those questions, and we'll have to take them away. I'm sure Andy will comment if I'm wrong, but I don't think any accounting changes in the HRA are possible before vesting day anyway. So it'll probably be a decision for the ultimate decision of the 151 of West Surrey when it's formally constituted. So as much as I think it might be a concern in the long run, I don't think anything can happen with the HRA right now. Could I just go to, if I can go to Andy for that one before I ask my next one, if that's all right, Chair?
Yeah, same with everything. Nothing can happen now in terms of the new shadow unitaries and the accounts from 1st of April. Everything will begin its life on 1st of April from the new ledger, whether that's revenue, general fund, HRA, capital, treasury, everything starts life from 1st of April 27.
So certainly anything that's either in the current or agreed capital budget within the current borough's HRAs, as long as they're being delivered in that period, won't really have a problem, I would guess. It's just things that are a longer term capital investment that might stretch into when there is one single HRA for West Surrey, which might cause a bit more confusion. Anyway, just going on to a couple of other bits. That EIA and various other elements, we obviously know at this point there'll be negotiations between East and West. I suspect they'll be quite weighted to the West being the poor relation based on what I've seen so far. And so it looks to me like we should be preparing for the pack that will effectively go to MHCLG to adjudicate this when inevitably there isn't an agreement, because at the moment it will so disproportionately impact the West. So I would, anything that starts to build that inevitable case to the government, I would certainly suggest that we continue with. And then just on the finances more generally, and then I'll stop. We obviously had a members briefing on finances. There were a lot of questions during that, and it was a private meeting effectively. So this is not something that was discussed in this meeting. But I wanted just to ask one of the questions that I asked in that meeting in public to see if I get the same response effectively. Can the 151 of the county, in this case Andy sitting right next to me, can you just confirm when you believe, without further intervention, the West Surrey unitary will be in special measures or something of the equivalent? Because I think, as Councillor Townsend has mentioned, this is something that all of us are probably hearing on the doorsteps at this point. And I am concerned that the figures show this likely to be a problem within the first year, potentially two, without further intervention. I just want to see if you'll comment on that in this public meeting.
Yes, so that was a private meeting, and this is a public meeting, but fair enough in terms of the question that is raised. So the section 114 is raised when all reserves and balances are exhausted and you can't set a balanced budget. So you'll no doubt not be surprised that my answer is that is an unknown quantity until the year one budget is actually set. So if you base it on the financial baseline which showed the deficit, then if that is not addressed, which of course it has to be addressed, then the reserves will last 1 year. But obviously a lot more variables have to play out in terms of setting the budget, not least within West Surrey, the discussions that are going to be needed with MHCLG for the current commissioners that are involved within Woking, and the basis of exceptional financial support that is going to be needed within West Surrey.
Very quick follow-up.
Paul, yes.
Very quick follow-up, if I may then. I think a lot of the basis for this whole process was that the eventual transformation would unlock savings. It sounds to me like it will be impossible to unlock any savings, assuming they're possible at all, but let's just assume that they are. it will be impossible to unlock those savings before a Section 114 notice for West Surrey is required. So we are, to be clear, reliant upon a pretty serious Hail Mary from the government to make this work prior to year 2. Would you agree with that position? That transformation savings are unlikely to be realised before a 114 notice?
So it would depend how far and fast a new shadow unitary wants to go, is the honest answer from that perspective. Now, I say that in a complete ignorance of the impact on the resident as a result of what that means to go fast, and how hard that you go at the savings to balance the budget. Without doubt, the West Surrey financial landscape will have to involve exceptional financial support, and I think the focus would need to be on the discussions with MHCLG about the range and long lasting of that exceptional financial support to limit the impact on the residents when it comes to setting the year 1 budget.
Thank you, Andy. And it's obviously an area of great concern. We have had an offer from Sir Tony Redmond, the lead commissioner at Woking, to do a briefing on some of the finances, and obviously in particular in light of Woking being the largest area of debt. So that's something that will be offered to the committee outside of this meeting, which I think will be very useful and much appreciated. I'm going to go to Julia now, and then I have Sean and Jane.
Thank you, Chair. It was just going back to Councillor Powell's questions, which were really important, and I don't feel that there was an adequate answer, actually. It felt like there wasn't a holistic response to the questions that were being asked, and it struck me that we were talking about business cases being brought forward, but there doesn't seem to be an overall strategy about to inform the business cases that will be brought forward, and I think that's something that's really important that we should have, please.
Nicola, thank you.
So the extent to which there is the strategy that's set out in the final plan that was agreed, that the government agreed. So the vision for unitary local government is in the 2 unitary business case. We then brought forward to earlier meetings the kind of the vision and the purpose and the success factors for the programme that we've set out here. So that is what then the work towards transition is being planned against. Obviously, as I've said, we're using principles to inform the decisions that will come forward, and there will be decision points with the shadow authorities to review the outputs of that work, but it stems back to the final plan that was agreed with government.
Thank you, Nicola. So Sean next, and Joe then Liz.
Thank you, Chair. I don't want to go over old ground, but I do just want to comment before I move on to my main question, which is when it comes to things like the foundational strategic authority, when it comes to things like the addition of NACs, when it comes with the extra burdens that are being placed on us from the ministry since we last met, what that's doing is that is increasing the scope of this programme, and I think as the SRO you need to reflect on that, and it's increasing the complexity and the cost and the speed at which we will go down. So independent of Andy's answer, and thank you for it, we have a serious issue in West Surrey going forward in terms of how we're going to manage this dilemma, and what we should be doing is putting a plug in as quickly as possible where we can. So that's the first point. But the second point, and thank you Andy for the paper, I think it was very helpful, the financial paper, I found it very clear, very insightful. I want to just check my understanding on a couple of things, and then maybe based on the response go into a little bit of discussion on 1 or 2 questions on 1 or 2 issues. So my understanding is the resolution here today is asking us to endorse the consent, the paper obviously, and the consents that are listed in page 74 and adjacent to that in terms of the, I think it's the section 24 related areas, and that would be a proposal that then would be put forward to the West Surrey Council for formal approval. Is my understanding correct on that point of process? Thank you.
Yeah, I think we've gone into the constitution bit, haven't we? Or, is that? No, okay. No, page 72. Okay. Yes, that is correct in terms of your understanding. Yeah.
Okay, so if I could just raise some concerns with the wording of a number of them. They reference back to a date which refers to the structural change order becomes effective. Now, my understanding was that was the March date that we had, and actually the section 24 I think is listed as July from the discussion we had earlier. So the consents almost look like they're being done retrospectively against an old date. Surely decisions that have happened before the July date of the structure of 2024, that is the guillotine date, not back in March. Could I just ask for clarification on that? Because there's a number of them that list it, whether it be various things.
Yeah, so the materials in the papers, both in this item and in the later constitution item, refer back to versions of the Section 24 direction as it related to the point last year where, before we knew the number of unitaries we were working towards, government had asked us to provide representations into them on that draft. So we were working on those drafts. These, the consents that are listed here were agreed at the time with all councils and so have been included in the pack. We have just last week received the update from MHCLG that says the date will now be early July. They've also amended the wording of the Section 24 based on the representations. That letter was circulated to committee members just this morning, so I understand you may not have had a chance to look at that, but there is some inaccuracies then in the papers as they were published because we've since had the later information. But you're correct in saying that the consents here would come to an early meeting of the shadow executives to agree. Most likely that will be a paper in June, we are thinking, but there's reference made to it in the constitution paper as well.
That's very clear, thank you. And then, so effectively the guillotine date will be reset as the July date, which is very helpful. Are we clear? Listen, I may have my faults, but I do like reading stuff, okay, and I will do my homework, yeah, when it's given to me, all 374 pages of it, so 72, thank you very much for that. But I'm still a little bit unclear as to when a decision is a decision. Is it when an executive or a council makes a decision, for example, to divest a piece of property, or is it when the exchange of contracts happen, or is it when it's completed? And obviously the same thinking applies, whether it be termination of somebody's employment, etc. Do we have clarity on how to apply this guillotine date?
So this is being worked through at the moment, a joint piece of work between the People and Governance work stream, between the Procurement and Contracts work stream, and between the Finance work stream, so that there will be a process that will clarify that mechanism, how Section 24 is applied to sovereign councils, and the consent, if not agreed here in the exemptions, would come through to the shadow authorities. So we are working to get that clarity.
Thank you. That would be very helpful. Because and don't get me wrong, we're not planning some big rush of. I mean, we have some stuff in progress, but we're not planning any big rush. But I just think we all need to be clear on what that actually means. The last thing, and thank you for your patience, Chair, is I do think we have an issue around these community grants. They are very important to our local organisations. And I have tried to steer multiple times a discussion around this at Surrey Leaders and a consistent approach to this, because what we shouldn't happen is that one borough is doing something, or even Surrey County Council is throwing money around that it potentially doesn't have, but that's a whole different discussion. And then we're doing something different here. We should have consistency to manage this transition for the local, for these very, very valuable community organisations. And I'm still not seeing it coming through strong enough in terms of our discussion at Surrey Leaders, maybe to have that consistency. But when you then start seeing some of it being implemented in the consent policy, it does leave things quite open to interpretation, and we won't have consistency. So can I ask that maybe, because Simon actually double hats, does he, in terms of the Surrey Leaders side, that perhaps we look to get that position resolved, because the consent wording then should reflect what we're aiming for. My personal position, which I haven't changed, is that we should try and, as much as possible, stabilise these organisations for the first year of the new authorities, which I think is implicit in what is said here. But I think we need to make it much stronger and behave consistently across the county. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. I think perhaps it is a decision we need to make at a Surrey leaders level, isn't it? So perhaps we could pick that up there. Joe.
Thank you. One. There we go. Thank you, Chair. I have a few questions. One is really to do with the finance plan and council tax. On slide 38, obviously council tax harmonisation is mentioned in this report. And does this mean that in some areas such as Spelthorne, and there are others that have a lower council tax, such as Runnymede also, could face increases above the usual 5% cap in 27-28? It's a recommendation to harmonise council tax in one go rather than phasing it over several years. What protections will be in place for residents who may see sharp rises in council tax because of the harmonisation? That's my first question, if I may. Thank you.
Something you'd respond to, Andy? Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'll have to answer it. I mean, it's not probably the answer that you want to hear, but so yes, it's obviously council tax harmonisation will be a decision for both shadow unitaries to make. You don't have to do it immediately in the first year. That will be the advice that was given by all the Section 151s, but it will be for the advice of the new Section 151 to be able to give to the new cabinet. What you'll see is, so the harmonisation element is just the district and boroughs element. And so what you won't see is an average increase across West Surrey that breaches the referendum principles. But within that, you may see areas within district and borough boundaries that are higher than the 5% and some areas that are lower to get to that harmonisation.
Yes, Joe.
Thank you. Obviously, with the cost of living crisis that we're in at the moment, you can imagine on the doorstep that this question is coming up all the time about the council tax increases as they have already this year. So the question I have for you, have any estimates been made of how much those in question, as you said, it wouldn't be right across the board, but some may have to pay more compared to now? And if not, can we please go ahead and bring that to the next meeting, if possible, please?
Yeah, I mean, we can do the harmonisation figures now, and we've got them ready to hand over to the new shadow unitaries. So we can publicise that because you can work that out now effectively through from the Band D bases that were set for 26-27. So we can share that.
Thank you. And if I can just ask a couple of other questions, Chair, if that's okay, I'll be very brief. I think it's fair that residents should be shown a clear breakdown of how much debt each council area is expected to inherit. I think that's really key critical. Given that Woking and Spelthorne make up around 58% of West Surrey's total debt, how will this affect the finances of the new authority? And given that Surrey County Council's share of the debt is higher than Spelthorne's, and page 65 focuses on Woking and Spelthorne debt only, but not the debt levels of the other councils joining West Surrey, what is planned to reduce this burden on West Surrey, and why have the other councils' debt levels not been included?
So we concentrate on Woking primarily Woking because they are already in receipt of £500 million worth of debt write-off, and that's the first commitment from government with further to come. Spelthorne are in intervention and are actively undertaking an asset rationalisation and reducing their debt burden. So for all of the councils, bar Woking, they have set revenue budgets that finance their debt, and therefore that is the basis to which we move forward into year one. That all of the debt, bar Woking, can be financed, and that is the basis with which we will go into the year one budget setting for those authorities. I think we've previously published what the debt levels are for each authority, and we've also published what the current revenue financing for that debt is in the financial baseline papers, but they will need to be refreshed and updated, ready for the year one budget. But the focus is on Woking because that cannot be managed, but that's a well-known factor. and I know that Woking will be, the commissioners will be doing a briefing session for new councillors on that to understand exactly what's being done, and that is where the exceptional financial support for Woking and what will inevitably be West Surrey will come into play. But we should recognise that so debt, where it's not commercial investment focus, is raised to be spent on schools, roads, so on, that critical infrastructure for communities. And if it is financed, which bar Woking it is, then it doesn't represent a problem in that sense. Clearly, the debt levels within West, in the main, because of Woking, are significant and will have to be dealt with. But overall, the other councils at this moment in time have balanced budgets that deal with their level of debt.
One final point. Thank you, Jo.
I'll be very brief. Thank you. I know I keep going on about minimum revenue provision, MRP. But slide 40 states that Spelthorne's revised MRP policy must be included in West Surrey's planning. Spelthorne has already updated its policy and is confident that it's now compliant. Are the current concerns about MRP mainly related to other councils rather than Spelthorne? And what steps are being taken to ensure that all councils joining West Surrey have a sound and lawful MRP approach in place before vesting day? Because if we don't get our figures right from the beginning, then we are going to go down a spiral which is going to go right to the bottom, and we need to make sure we get all our information together as soon as possible.
That fundamentally is a question for every sovereign council. They would have set their MRP policy as part of their 26-27 budget, and on that basis, then it's budgeted for in terms of the amount that they have to put aside to repay the debt, but they would have also viewed that is a prudent MRP policy. I think we've flagged in the financial baseline that the alignment and the new MRP policy will be a key factor for West Surrey. Without doubt, in terms of harmonising the MRP policies and the impacts around that, what does that look like from that perspective? Equally, I would advocate engaging early with external audit around the MRP policy, and we should learn from the commissioners about the MRP policy going forward for West Surrey. However, there is a balance to be struck.
I wonder if it's obviously available, because we just need to go and look on the relevant council website, whether it might be useful for the next meeting to actually just have a short summary of what each of the council's MRP policies are, which would highlight where there may be concerns. Obviously, Woking and Spelthorne have revised theirs in recent years, but yeah, it would just show us where we are. I've got Liz, then Sean.
Thank you. I just wanted to pick up about the action on the equality impact assessment. I don't know whether we committed or we said took an action for that to be updated or not, and I would very much appreciate if that could be just confirmed and added to the list of actions, please. And also again, coming back to the importance of, just to reiterate, the importance of having some kind of idea how much council tax is going to increase. I would definitely support that, because, you know, going forward, again, the increase will be on the whole amount, 4.99% will be on the whole amount that people are paying, I'm assuming. Whereas at the moment, that isn't the case on the sections for district and boroughs. So we are looking at an overall increase anyway, without, obviously, even more increases may be required. So it would be very, it would be really useful to have that information. Thank you.
Nicola, thank you.
So on the equality impact assessment, so the tool, as you know, is used to support decision makers to assess the impact and have due regard to the public sector equality duty. So we will bring forward EIAs as they relate to future decisions. I think redoing the one that related to the decision at the moment in time around the 2 unitary business case probably wouldn't be the best use of the resource that we have, and we need to look forward to the future decisions. So it will accompany the decisions that travel through the shadow authorities. It will pick up elements of that, but will need to be related to the decisions that Cabinet or council members will be making at that time.
through you, Chair, with all due respect, I do not think that the debt and the impact on vulnerable people and low-income people has been picked up adequately. So I think the circumstances around that, and it did say that during the transition it would be updated. There was a promise inferred within that, and with all due respect, I don't think that adequate concentration on that particular area has been made. I mean, we know more now than when you first did that. So I think it is important that we update that, to be honest.
So it will be updated as it relates to the budget, as it relates to service configuration decisions. So I guess I'm just saying like that, it will be updated for the current decisions. It won't just be a straight update of the document, because that document applied to the decision at the time for those councils taking that decision to support a 2-unitary business case. So I just want to say that it's not that we're not going to do it. I just want to put it in the context of it will relate to the decisions and the application of the public sector equality duty at the moment that those decisions are taken.
So it will be. So if we have another one that accompanies the budget,
yes,
then it does need to be picked up in that.
Yeah. So it's our intention that both shadow authorities, as they take their decisions on the budget, will receive an equality impact assessment that will accompany that decision, and that we will also. There are some other examples provided in the appendix of likely EIAs that would be brought forward as well. So if anything, you'll be seeing more than what you saw at the business case stage.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you both. Sean.
Thank you, Chair. I'm mindful we probably need to move on to the next topic, so I'll try and be brief. But I was very happy that Nicola gave us an insight into the budgetary position and the latest forecast. And surprise, surprise, you asked all the themes how much they needed, and they needed more than the 35. I think we could have worked that out quite early on. But I am curious as to what the unconstrained amount is currently today on the latest forecast. And I would like to request, because I think we agreed previously that this was the place to scrutinise the control of that budget. I would like to ask that we have a full update next time, including the latest forecast, not just committed and budget. And I think she's gone now, but when can Vicky expect the credit back, seeing as we've now got 1.8 million back from the government? Thank you.
We'll bring the forecast to the next joint committee. We're working through, as you know, we had some challenge sessions last week, so we're working through some of the actions which were set, and from there we will have a better indication of the financial forecast going forward. It's probably fair to say that we've already identified some areas that will not need to be funded, but we will bring it to you at the next JC.
Thanks.
Just to add that the time that forecast exercise was completed, we didn't know that the government would be providing an extra 1.8 million. So those challenge sessions were done on the potential to exceed the 35 million. It wasn't factoring in the additional almost 2 million. So with the challenge sessions, and as Chairman said, the likelihood that some of that forecast would be reduced and the additional money, that's why I haven't changed the risk in the pack. So whilst there is a risk in there, it hasn't significantly changed. And as I said, if that was looking likely, we would bring that to the committee.
Thank you. I won't make plans for the credit then. Thank you.
Thanks, Nicola. I'm going to go to Catherine, and that'll be the last speaker on this then.
Thank you, Chair. Just looking at the table on page 68 of the papers, which is the Finance LGR work stream, and just looking at the different areas that you have broken out underneath that, I couldn't see where the standardisation of fees and charges fitted in. And under the general ledger, it seemed to be very Surrey focused rather than including for the Ds and Bs. And I just really wanted some reassurance on those two things and where they sat, Andy, if that's okay.
Yep, sure. So the fees and charges will come under the budget planning. So setting 27-28 budgets in the far left. covers a whole host of things. So, but fees and charges will be in there, and you know whether there's harmonisation potentially of fees and charges and so on and so forth in the year one budget to consider. So the general ledger systems. That is about building the new ledger for the 2 new unitaries, and yes, there's the it's not even splitting the ledger. We're building new ledgers, and so county colleagues are involved, but district and borough colleagues are involved because we'll need to build up the functions and activity for the districts and boroughs as well as then the county and bringing those together into the 2 new ledgers. So the component parts of all that is incumbent with all that. So they're very much part of that whole new systems ledger. In fact, I would go so far as to say that there are more important systems from a finance perspective, right? I'm talking about revenue, and then you talk about council tax and business rates and interfacing with the new ledger, and therefore district and borough colleagues are key in ensuring that happens from day one, as well as all the other important systems that are needed to make sure that payments are made, because that is the legal and safe critical aspect from a ledger perspective, that we can make payments on 1st of April and pay staff as well.
Thank you, Andy. Okay, I had a couple of points which I have shared in advance, which was just to mention on page 44 and 45, in relation to the communication work, we have slightly different descriptions of the audience as we would communicate with. I think the page 45 description would be best repeated at page 44 for consistency, because that does contain all of the audiences. And then my other point was in relation to the just how we do communicate and how we set the brand for the new authority. So given some of the issues that have been raised, particularly in Spelthorne, for example, it is going to be important to sort of recognise some of the historic geographies. There may be other areas as well, but I think we just need to add a line that's going to be important to be recognised too. Okay, so we come to the recommendations before us then, which are on page 21 of the papers. So we're being asked to endorse the draft content for the implementation plan phase section of the implementation plan, which covers finance, stakeholder engagement, equality analysis and information governance, as set out in Annex 1 and 2. Note developments on an assurance framework for the devolution and LGR programme and the positions at 23rd of March, and note the latest position on risk management, budget monitoring and communication for the programme. Is that agreed? Thank you very much. We'll move on then to item 5 on the agenda, and this is the proposed constitution for the West Surrey Authority. So I think we've got Karen Brimacombe and Susan Sale who are going to speak to introduce this. Thank you. I'm going to hand over to Susan. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you, Chair. Members will be aware that the new shadow authorities for the West and East Surrey are required by law to operate mandatory governance arrangements, which include the creation of a leader in Cabinet Executive and a member code of conduct from the inaugural meeting in May this year. To assist the shadow authority to agree a proposed constitution, the Joint Committee is asked to consider the draft constitution as attached to your agenda papers this morning and make a recommendation to West Surrey Shadow Authority. The Surrey Structural Changes Order sets out what is required of the shadow authorities, and further details of their roles are included in paragraph 3 of the report. The shadow authorities require a constitution for the shadow period in order to provide a governance framework for its activities and functions. It's important to note that the proposed constitution is for the shadow period only, and it will be replaced by a separate West Surrey Council constitution for vesting day and beyond, which will govern all functions and services to be delivered by the new unitary council. The draft constitution before you today has been created with reference to previous examples of shadow authority constitutions compiled by Cumberland and Westmoreland and Furness shadow authorities, as well as those for North Yorkshire, Buckinghamshire and Somerset. And in some instances, we've also had specific regard to the existing constitutions of all 12 predecessor councils across Surrey. Provisions for the Councillor Code of Conduct are based upon the Local Government Association Model Code, and guidance from the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy and the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny has also been taken into account to reflect best practice. If I may, Chair, there are some specific details that I would like to highlight. Members will note in paragraph 8 of the covering report that the Constitution is simply a working document and can be easily amended to cater for the needs of the Shadow Council during that shadow period. It's intended to be sufficiently flexible to morph as the Shadow Authority's own governance framework evolves and develops during that period. To that end, the proposed establishment of a Constitution subcommittee by the Standards Committee will enable the Constitution to be reviewed and updated as appropriate throughout the shadow period, and some tasks have already been identified for consideration by the subcommittee, including the incorporation of a petition scheme, contract procedure rules and detailed budget procedure rules. Paragraph 11 of the report provides details of the format and the 6 sections of the Constitution, which are based on the LGA Model Constitution. Paragraph 12 provides further explanation in relation to the proposed executive arrangements. Paragraph 13 highlights the 4 main committees that are being proposed for the shadow period, which are an Overview and Scrutiny Committee, an Employment Committee, Standards Committee and an Audit and Governance Committee. As highlighted in the workshops briefing session with members last month, these are working titles only and may well be amended by the Shadow Authority. In addition, each committee has the ability to establish subcommittees and/or task and finish groups should there be a need to do so. It's proposed in paragraph 15 of the report that each of those 4 main committees holds their first meeting immediately following the end of the inaugural Shadow Authority meeting in May for the purpose of establishing their committees and subcommittees and electing and appointing the chairs, so that the initial governance framework of all committees and subcommittees can be established from day one from the outset. For this reason, the Joint Committee is asked to resolve to delegate to the theme sponsor of the People and Governance theme the authority to amend the previously approved schedule of meetings to include the first meeting of each of those 4 main committees on the 21st of May at the end of the inaugural meeting. Further to the letter from MHCLG received by the Chief Executives towards the end of last week, as has been mentioned already and explained by the Programme Director, some small amendments to the financial procedure rules are going to be required regarding the Section 24 direction and proposed general consent order. Specifically, that the wording in the draft at the moment relates to the 30th of June, and this will need to be changed to a date when the Section 24 notice comes into effect, which we anticipate to be in early July. I am conscious, Chair, that committee members will have a number of comments and queries in addition to those that have been circulated in the addendum paper to members. I also appreciate members may wish for a revised draft of the Constitution to be brought back to the Joint Committee in early May for further consideration if it's not approved today, so that it can be approved ahead of the inaugural meeting of the Shadow Authority. And with that in mind, I'm happy to take any further questions or comments. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Susan. Do I have any contributions? Everyone's happy with the Constitution, then we can go out early.
If I may.
Paul.
Thank you. Obviously, thank you, Susan, and for everybody who's worked on this. I mean, there's been a number of comments that have been put in by members. There's been a summary of those items mentioned. I think a lot of them are quite straightforward. They're either typos or they're matters for members to determine. Certainly from my perspective, I've absolutely no issues with the opposition being the predominant chairs and vice chairs. I think that considering the 4 committees that we're talking about, that's relevant. Obviously, that might not be for other things that are later added to the Constitution, but for this, certainly. As I know a number of my colleagues agree with, trying to establish certain values, even within this draft, is important. And public engagement and participation is certainly one that I know a number of us here would like to bake into this from the beginning, without making it into a political discussion. I think anybody who wants to remove public participation or reduce that, that's something that they can choose to do later themselves. While we're here as elected people, I'm certainly happy to plump for more public participation than less. I think you've dealt with all of the issues about all the spelling and various other things. The bit that I wanted just to ask officers to give a view on is the relationship between the role of the SRO and the interim head of paid service. That came in the second email, I think, from Karen yesterday. I just want to ask officers if you can just summarise where you believe that the roles now sit with each other, and if you believe the Constitution addresses any conflict. And also just to check my assumption, although the interim officers will not be direct employees of West Surrey, because they can't be, because it doesn't exist to hire anybody, they still have statutory obligations to this new council. And so it is important for us to understand any potential conflicts or overlaps between the various roles in this document, as far as I can see. I don't really know if there's anything else that needs to be said, but if officers have got a view on those overlapping roles, I think that's the bit that I'm most interested in.
Yeah, through you, Chair. Thank you for the question, Councillor Follows. I'm not sure that it is correct that the interim statutory officers can't be employees of the new authority, but it certainly is the case that the interim statutory officers are intended to remain employees of their sovereign authorities, but they will still be officers of the Shadow Council. So they will have obligations to the Shadow Council alongside their existing obligations to their sovereign councils as well. So they will be officers, but not employees, I think is the intention. In terms of the relationship between the senior responsible officer and the head of paid service, whether interim or permanent, I think that's probably something that needs to be given more thought. And of course, we don't know who those people may be at the current time. You will note that in the Constitution there is already a protocol in respect of some of the statutory officers, but not all. And I suspect that might be something that will need to be discussed, and it may be useful to have some protocol as to how those two roles do fit together going forwards, because it's not crystal clear, I would say, in my view. I think you're probably asking the question in respect of the two issues that were raised in advance, and thank you to members who gave us some feedback in advance and allowed us to consider that before today's meeting. It's very clear in the structural change order that the implementation team is led by the Chief Executive of Surrey County Council. It's also very clear in Article 15 that the implementation team supports the Joint Committee, but it is then a choice of the Shadow Authority whether they continue after the inaugural meeting to choose for the implementation team to support them. I think the letter from MHCLG that came round to all chief executives made it very, very clear what their intention is, and that the expectation is that the shadow authorities will continue with the implementation team and continue with the chief executive of the county council being the senior responsible officer for the implementation team. But my caveat is that that should be as a result of a formal resolution of the shadow authority in due course. But assuming that that decision is made by the Shadow Authority, then the structural change order does provide us with some guidance. So it provides that Article 15.5, that in respect of the implementation team, the sovereign councils must release officers to that implementation team. But of course, Shadow Authority can make delegations to officers as well. And further, I would say Article 31 provides that the Shadow Executive may delegate functions to officers of all of the sovereign councils as well. And of course, the Shadow Executive can make delegations, which could include delegations to the Head of Paid Service, for example. I think Article 31 is relevant to take into consideration. in that it provides that the head of paid service, and specifically includes the interim, has the powers of Section 4 of the Local Government and Housing Act 1989. What those powers are relate to the appointment of officers and the structure of the organisation. And this SCO makes it clear that they relate to the shadow authority and the interim head of paid service in the same way that they would for fully vested authority. So the head of paid service does have a role in terms of the appointment of officers and staff and reporting that to council. But the structural change order is also very clear that the implementation team has duties throughout the shadow period, and that is reinforced by the letter from MHCLG. So I think there is clearly a role for both, and there will need to be some further work on how those interact with each other. In terms of the two specific delegations that were raised, the first delegation, which is paragraph 2.1f, relates specifically to the implementation team. So I think a delegation to the head of paid service without the being exercised without the agreement of the senior responsible officer would be extremely unwise, if not unlawful, because it's clear the SRO leads the implementation team. So I think officer advice would be that you certainly include the agreement of the SRO in that one. The other one, paragraph G, relates to the specific delegations of the head of paid service and who he or she would choose to delegate them to. And I think that's probably less imperative, but I think ultimately it is a matter for members to consider. Thank you.
Paul, thank you.
Just to come back on a couple of those things. Firstly, thank you for that explanation, and just for transparency, for everybody else's sake, I'm the one that asked those questions that that were responded to in the email from Karen yesterday. I think it would be beneficial. I think a racy is a little bit not quite what I mean, but some kind of very straightforward chart that outlines some of the core statutory obligations that are held by each of those four roles, effectively the 3 interim statutory officers and the SRO, so that it is absolutely clear where they are and what those roles and what those responsibilities are, partly because there's at least some possibility that nobody in this room, or indeed some of the other rooms that are talking about this, might get elected to this thing, and a bunch of new people will probably need to have clarity as to where these roles are, and that would be not unreasonable. Just in terms of a couple of the other bits in the document, I'm trying not to be coloured by my experience of members' questions and length of meetings at Waverley, which are somewhat unique in their length and character. But the point about motions, the way it's done at Surrey County Council, I think works quite well. You have an overarching time frame for motions to be dealt with. Members are allowed to submit more than one motion, but it's done effectively in a sequential order. So your second motion will be taken after any of the others, so you're not bombarding the whole meeting. So at the moment, I think it's a little bit too far for me in terms of forbidding it, and probably some flex could be added there. But I think the other problem is, until we know who is there and what they're doing, it's very difficult to know how meetings will go, because I'd be in favour of seriously restricting things at Waverley based on my current experience, but it is often members that colour how this works in practice, so I wouldn't want to go too far down that rabbit hole. But motions is probably the only one I'd say needs to be made a little bit more liberal than it is in this.
Thank you, Paul. Sean?
Thanks, Chair. Thank you, Susan, and the team as well, next to you as well, for all the work that's been done. I said, Karen, obviously, under your leadership. So thank you very much for all of that. I just want to reflect on everything you said, and there was quite a richness of content there for us all to absorb, and maybe we'd like to take a little bit more time to reflect on it further. But the overarching principle for me is that the senior responsible officer has been asked to make sure this thing works. And that we are safe and legal on day one. And I think it's incumbent that we probably remember that. But it is a he in this context. That role also needs to do it through and with the new authorities and the executives of those new authorities. So it will be for proposals to come forward for those bodies to reflect on, and for them to then hopefully agree to, and where they don't agree, to have a robust discussion with the SRO and the team as to the areas of difference. And I think, broadly speaking, That's what I heard in what was said, and I think it's important that we remember our responsibilities to try and encourage that collaboration. With respect to the content of the Constitution, I'm not a massive fan as it stands at the moment, I'll be honest, because it doesn't pass all the tests that I would like to see in a Constitution, which is that we provide access to the residents to ask questions of ourselves as councillors should we be elected. And I think that isn't ingrained in it across all the committees, and I think that's a mistake. I think it's important that members' rights are respected as well, and also officers' obligations are also reiterated. And I say that in the context of some challenges we've had across this county. Otherwise, we might not have been discussing debt quite so much at this committee. I think it's important that the executive is held to account and be seen to held to account by the various members. I think that's a foundation stone of how the model is supposed to work. And the question is it allowing enough of that? And I think we need to be efficient in terms of the officer resource. So I think we've got one too many committees in there, and I think we could be more effective if we did the Constitutional Committee as a working group straight into Council, and we moved the remaining responsibilities of the Standards Committee to the remaining Audit and Governance Committee. And I think the last thing is, and I'm sure we've all been victims of this, we've been enriched by the experience, we need to try and avoid time wasting as well, and possibly Paul touched on that earlier. So there must always be a threshold before work is done and officer time is used up. And getting that right and consistent through the Constitution, I think, is also important. So it was good to see the feedback from the officers in various areas, but as it stands today, I can't support it without amendment, and therefore I would like to see further work done on it before May. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Catherine, did you want to raise some points? I know you submitted a number in advance. Would you want to introduce those? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I think it would be really useful for us to have a discussion offline. I think, it's not practical for us to go through all of the questions that were raised, and the questions that have been raised haven't been grouped, so it's quite difficult. I think that there are some things that, Paul has already intimated, I think all of us would support in terms of opposition members chairing the various committees, and I think that there are things that we can probably all agree on. I think that respecting everyone's time is clearly important, making sure that we don't have meetings that ramble on and don't achieve anything. That clearly doesn't... I'm not looking at you, Paul. You just happen to be in line of sight. I think it is important that we reflect on some of the things, but I do think it is important for us to reflect on the fact that the SRO does have, a number of powers that are very clearly laid out in the statutory change order. I think we need to respect the fact that the implementation team has a very difficult job to do in a very short space of time. Just the conversations we've had around HRA, going away, making sure that we get all of the legal side of that pulled together, that it's something that residents can understand, as has been rightly pointed out. They have been paying into an account to get something out of it, and if we take that away from them, that's got to be managed in the right way. So I do think it needs a bit of a balance still to reflect the fact that it is a shadow year, but also to reflect the fact that particularly in West Surrey, residents are really angry with the situation they've been put in, and I think potentially a lot of us are quite angry at the decision that the government has made in terms of the split that's been made. But equally, that decision has been made and we have to make it work. So I think that it would be good to be able to just have some time away to be able to work through all of these different issues to see if we can come to an aligned position. And I think we can. But I don't think I would be happy to agree as it stands right now, because as you will have seen from the list of questions and proposals I put forward, there are things I do think need to change. But equally, I do think we need to be very cognizant of the fact that officers, and actually all of us, are under a huge amount of time pressure right now. And we want to be able to do this in a time-effective way. So I think it would be helpful for you to go away and look at the issues that have been raised, group them together so that we're almost making decisions against these things, so that would make the time for any meeting outside of this environment more efficiently spent, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Catherine. Mark.
Thanks, Chair. I agree with a lot of what's been said. I think Paul hit on a very poignant point there. Then no one knows who's going to be elected to this new council, and it could be a whole bunch of brand new people who have never sat in council before and will need some guidance. I'm going to temper what I was going to say, actually, because re-looking at it, just to be clear, this is the procedure for the shadow authority. So this is going to be different to what we're used to in normal council, and I think it's important. Although on one hand, I agree, and I would love to see more resident participation in council meetings, or certainly more accessibility. The next six to 9 months with the shadow authority are going to be very much procedural meetings about putting down plans and constitution going forward to make sure that from the 1st of April 2027 they're in a position to run the council. So I think time is really important, because there is going to be a shed load of stuff to go through to get to that position. So it needs to be as streamlined as possible. I note in there are certain issues where people want to expand on wording. I would like to reduce wording down. I'm all for making things simpler, not more complicated. I think our documents are far too long as they stand, but it's just my opinion. And I think if we want to encourage the public, we need to make it much clearer and easier to understand what's going on. So I think there's some work to be done for this. I think we can simplify this a lot more specifically for that shadow authority to make it very clear on what this constitution is designed for. I think I was getting a bit confused reading this and thinking back to our days at Surrey and what we did with boroughs and trying to sort of impact on that. And actually it's not necessarily the case for this first year. So I think this is and I think we need to be very clear that this is a very specific set of procedural rules for the next 9 months, and that from the period April the 1st, we will be in a position to have a new set of rules and constitution going forward for the new council. So I think we need to take it in that sense, if you like, and not cloud it with what we're used to doing, debating in, let's say, for example, Surrey County Council at the moment, and or in the boroughs and districts. So I think it needs some more work. I agree with Sean, and Catherine, maybe we should take this offline and look at it to bring back to the next meeting.
Thank you for that, Mark. Yeah, that's an important point, isn't it, that this is just something for the shadow year, but I guess it's quite important perhaps to set down, certainly us as a group here, what principles we'd like to see reflected in there, because they then can follow through into the constitution for the new council once it is vested. Sinead.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to thank the officers really that have worked on this. I think this is a really solid draft, and you've picked up on feedback and responded really quickly to that. And this is a challenging document, I think, to pull together. I've been looking at the recommendations, Chair, that sit with this item, and I'd be keen to understand what happens next. It clearly is still a draft from your perspective, particularly from maybe the SRO perspective. What happens next with this draft document? I don't think time really is on our side at the moment, this side of the elections, to progress much more or perhaps take things offline. So I'm just struggling to understand, subject to election outcomes, the 7th of May, what happens next for this draft document from the SRO or the lead officer's perspective. Is there discussions with the department around pulling this together, getting input, coming back to before the inaugural meeting, perhaps? I'm just trying to understand what the next steps are, because I do feel we've got 3 weeks to the elections. It's not long. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Did you want to respond on that, Karen? Thank you.
Can I come in just before I hand over to Susan for the detail? But it was something I was looking at this morning, because a number of you have mentioned about having an offline meeting. So in terms of what happens next with the document, it will come back to I'm sensing you want it to come back to you before we present it to the Shadow Authority. If you would like an offline meeting, we actually have to go to print with the new version of the Constitution because of the bank holiday on Thursday, the 30th of April. So we've got about 2 weeks between now and actually going to print again with a new version. So I'll hand over to Susan if that's okay, Chair, for anything else she wants to add, but just to bear that in mind.
Thanks for that information. Yeah, it's all quite tight, isn't it? Thanks, Karen. Susan?
Yes, thank you, Karen, for those comments, which are really helpful. I think just to focus minds, that the 30th of April is 2 weeks and 2 days away. We're very happy to bring the Constitution back to the May Joint Committee meeting, and I think it's clear from some of the comments that that would be the preference rather than delegating us to make some minor amendments. So we will bring it back to you then, but that gives us realistically, in terms of discussions with the PMO team as well, and a few days for officers to consider a final draft, that probably gives us in reality 10 days to make any changes. So to hold a meeting with members, another kind of workshop style meeting, might be quite difficult to get diaries together in that time frame, and then to still allow us to actually deal with the documentation of it and the publication of it might be tricky. So I think the hope is that today we could get a very clear steer from members as to the changes that they would like to be made, and then we would have time to incorporate those. But we're looking for really some collective views that you can agree on that we could then take away to implement.
Thank you, Susan. Mark?
I mean, personally, looking at the document, there isn't a huge amount in there that is massively important, as in it would affect the new council going forward. I mean, I could make a lot of changes in that and make it a lot of better document and more flexible. And that's no disrespect to yourself, but just from a working document for councillors, but as a sort of a backbone of something we could go forward with, if we were prepared then to be able to amend it going forward. I think, because what we don't want to do is tie the hands of the new Shadow Council into a document where they can't then operate or work particularly easily. Bearing in mind there's going to need to be a certain amount of flexibility with the new council. As we've said, it will have a good percentage of brand new people, probably a percentage of borough councillors there who aren't used to working at a unitary style level. And there will be a lot of important decisions to be made very early on. So the document needs to be flexible enough to enable people to do that and to work around it.
Thank you, Mark. Sinead?
So, taking into account Mark's comments, would recommendation, I'm looking at the recommendations to see, 1.2, yep, cover that.
Well, I think that would support Mark's position. I think there are a few points to work through, so we haven't discussed specifically some of the points that were raised by Catherine. And I know there's been a few other points picked up as well by others. I don't suggest we have a whole workshop of the whole committee, and certainly I'm happy to sort of meet with the leads in this area to discuss it, but I wonder whether we might just get a small group together just to work through and finalise this to come back with proposals to the next meeting, and that might be something we could achieve in the next later this week or early next week or something to make it happen, and not to take up too much officer time, but just to get to something that we're all happy with. So that would just be a slight editing of that point.
So, Chair, a quick question on that. Sounds reasonable in principle, but you mentioned a small group. Who would that small group be?
Whoever wants to be on that small group, I suppose, is the proposal. I mean, obviously, it's suggested currently that the chair does it, so I'm happy to sort of take on and be part of that. We can do something as we've done with the appointments and have a group of 4 that represents all of the different groupings here on the in the West Surrey Joint Committee, if people will be happy with that. I'll go to Catherine while you're thinking about that, Sinead. Yes, thanks, Catherine.
I was just thinking that we've obviously had to have a bit of a reshuffle of the appointments panel on Thursday. So we've now got a meeting on Wednesday. So maybe some of the time that we've allocated on Thursday could be used for this. And I mean, I know that might inconvenience you, Anne-Marie. I'm very sorry. Hopefully you would be available. We can, I'm sure, shuffle things around. But then at least it would be done this week and would allow us to move forwards, if that makes sense.
So I guess that would then sort of include myself. Catherine, presumably you'd want to be involved. You've had a big input. Who would that be from the sort of Conservative side? Would that be yourself, Sinead? Or is it...
Yes, it would be, Chair. Just to follow on from that, would we be feeding back to you then, Chair, and then you... I'm just thinking of recommendation 1.2. We'd then feed back to you as Chair, and you would then feed back?
I think my suggestion would be that we edit 1.2 rather than just being the Chair, to be a small subgroup of this committee that has a meeting and then comes back with the changes to the next committee.
Would that work with officers leading on this?
Susan, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think officers can certainly accommodate such a meeting in the next few days, so that would be very helpful. Yes, the recommendation could be amended for the working group of this committee to provide specific feedback to officers and for them to incorporate that in a further draft to be brought back to the May committee. And we could certainly informally feedback before that committee meeting as to what those changes are likely to be. The other thing I would just mention, Chair, if that's okay, is that it's great to have the feedback. If there is feedback at the end of the day that we haven't for any reason been able to incorporate at this stage, due to time constraints or whatever that may be, there is nothing to prevent officers reporting that feedback to the Constitution working group at their first meeting when the Shadow Authority exists anyway. We're hoping that subcommittee will be established from the 21st of May and will have an early meeting, and they could indeed informally receive feedback or comments from this committee in an informal manner to take into account in their work going forwards as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susan. So we'll look to amend that with a group of 4. So I think that's going to be then myself, Sinead, Catherine, and I think one other, probably Paul from the... Is that okay with the others? Yep, Julia? Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. Okay, fine. So is the wording on 1.2 going to be, as it stands currently, resolves to recommend the proposed West Surrey Constitution, subject to... So we're not recommending it, are we, really? It's actually going to be... yes, it's 1.3, really, isn't it? Provides feedback to the theme sponsor and resolves to receive a further report. So provides feedback to the theme sponsor through a working group of 4 councillors. I'll just come to Sean. Thank you.
Sorry, Chair. When we started that discussion, it was about people could be invited that wanted to be. Then we've ended up with I think we're almost shaping it as a proportional subcommittee, which we don't have to do if it's a working group. I'm now a bit confused what we're doing, and I'm feeling potentially members that want to be included are being excluded. So could I just have... my suggestion would be where we started, which is a meeting primarily based on the table of issues that have been raised, and we kind of go yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, to try and keep it focused. But if you want to go down the formal subcommittee route, where it has to be proportional everything, I'm okay with that. But then I would need to work with my colleagues to see who we would put forward in that context, because at the moment I'd like to be involved.
Thank you, Sean. I'm sorry, I made a slightly flippant comment of anybody who wants to be involved. I think I was looking at the working group option in terms of aligning diaries and getting people together and finding the time so we can make this work for officers and meeting various deadlines as well. So if the committee would rather have a wider representation, but it would need to be, I think, a fairly set date, and it's looking like Thursday might be a good time because that time was available. Is the committee happy for others to be involved in input? Liz?
Yeah, can I just suggest that people that want to be involved, put their hands up now and then see how many it is, to be honest, and then that can make a Thursday date, perhaps.
So we move to an informal briefing to agree and put something forward to the next, to be brought forward to the next meeting. And the date to be circulated by, date and time to be circulated by Simon in constitution myself. I'll just go to Susan. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you, Chair. Just to throw another option into the mix in case members would prefer, is that we could take away an action to group the feedback that has been given into topics and provide a suggestion and email that round to members, whether they feel that that might be able to happen by way of email, or alternatively, if a member working group needs to be established, then I have got a proposed amendment to the resolution, if that would be helpful.
Thank you, Susan. So I think we've agreed probably that we don't want the working group. I think it might be helpful to have the email and the themes created to summarise things, and then to have the briefing just to finalise that with officers. So we'll maximise the effectiveness use of time. Paul. Okay, thank you. Sorry, Arabella?
I'm so sorry, Chair. Could we just confirm, so the briefing, would that be on Thursday?
Yes.
Right. With...
Afternoon. Okay. Suggest afternoon.
I think we can work out a time. We'll look at the Thursday and see if that is feasible. If that's not feasible, then it'll be another time in the near future. But it needs to be a time, I think, that I can attend, and I think it's probably important that someone like Catherine attends, who's had a lot of interest and input into this and made some key points. But if we can then make just sure that we can have that informal session to discuss further and then bring back to the next committee. Do you have some proposed wording for that? I had some suggested, but I'm sure you've got some better words, Susan. Thank you.
Chair, I was just going to ask about the first recommendation about adding the dates to the Shadow Authority, whether members feel able to agree that today. And then I think recommendation 1.3 probably simply needs to be amended to include the wording following a further member briefing, provide feedback to the theme sponsor, etc.
I'm so sorry, I do apologise, Sinead. I'll come back to you. Yes, of course.
Thank you, Chair. I don't understand why recommendation 1.2 won't apply.
Because that was just about...
No, it was dismissed. It was dismissed. And I want to know why it doesn't fit where we've got to so far with the discussion. We've moved on to 1.3, but I don't see why 1.2 can't apply.
Thanks, Sinead. So the officer advised, and I kind of agree that was probably the better way to go. Paul?
I mean, the only reason that we would be doing 1.2 is if we were actually ready to recommend it right now, which I think the consensus in the room is that we aren't. I mean, I wasn't proposing personally that we needed a vote. It sounded like we were all going to have a working group. But, I mean, obviously, if somebody wants to have a vote, then obviously we can, but it doesn't seem to necessarily...
So 1.2, I think it was more about signing it off with... signing it off with just I's to be dotted and T's to be crossed, whereas 3 recognises there's a little more work needed that people would like to happen before a final paper comes back to us. Is that correct? Thank you. Is that fine? Thank you very much. We need to look at 1.2 as well, at 1.1 as well. So this is about adding the meetings to the schedule. Does anyone have any points or discussions they want to make, or is everyone happy with 1.1 when we come to the agreement? Yes, Karen, thank you.
Sorry, it's just point 1. 1.1 was a separate, it's one, yeah.
So point 1 is the thing. Okay, so can we now move to the resolution? Are we all happy to do that? So we are being recommended to agree point 1, that we resolve to delegate authority to the theme sponsor for the People and Governance theme to amend the schedule of meetings for the West Surrey Shadow Authority to include meetings of the Audit and Governance Committee, the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, the Employment Committee and the Standards Committee on 21st of May 2026. And we are then agreeing that following a further member briefing, we'll provide feedback to the theme sponsor for the People and Governance theme on the proposed West Surrey Shadow Authority constitution and resolve to receive a further report at our meeting in May 2026. Is that agreed? Yes. Thank you all very much. That brings us to the end of this morning's meeting. Amazing timing again. Incredible. Thank you very much to all the officers that have provided the papers, done the work and come along today, and to all the councillors who've contributed too. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.